As you've heard on Bridge City News, the government of Alberta will be loosening some restrictions fairly soon, February 8th, including one-on-one training in gyms. To talk about this in more detail is our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, joining me once again from Edmonton. Tyler, with the presence of the COVID-19 variants, health officials say the virus may be with us for quite some time, so we shouldn't expect for things to return to normal for a little while. What will that normal actually look like though, right?
Yeah, the thing about the variants is that we haven't seen sort of widespread spread, I guess, of the variants in Alberta just yet. There have been cases, but we're not talking nearly the same numbers of cases as the original. But it seems to be part of the concern is how much quicker these variants might transmit, whether or not vaccinations are going to be as effective against them. So it sort of leaves open this question from a policy perspective, but also for everyone living in Alberta, of even with these relaxations. We had hair salons a couple weeks ago, nice new free pandemic haircut here, and we have gyms opening up to some extent. But so the government and health officials have been hinting that depending on what happens with these variants, some of these restrictions we've been living with for a few months now may persist for some time yet.
Yeah, and we could have 6 people at a table at a restaurant again, so we can finally get together with more of our family, which would be nice to see, starting February 8th. Medicine Hat Cyprus MLA Drew Barnes is in the news again, discussing why more regionalized measures are needed when it comes to government restrictions, and Tyler, not the blanket approach for everyone.
Yeah, he's made a little bit of noise in the last couple weeks about trying to get sort of regional restrictions, in areas that aren't as poorly hit or that have done better than Edmonton and Calgary in particular, still the hardest hit parts of the province, saying that, look, if cases are down in Medicine Hat or wherever, maybe they should be allowed to open some of their businesses. Maybe they should have a little bit more freedom and flexibility. Mr. Barnes has been making some waves all over the place recently, but that's something that's come up, and we'll have to see if we sort of go to that in any way, because sort of at the start of this, the Alberta government had this sort of zone approach to this thing that was, I found, quite difficult to follow and complicated. As things sort of flatten out, maybe we'll return to that, but as with everything else in this pandemic, it's just wait and see at this point.
Mr. Barnes has also been arguing for an independence referendum for the spring of 2023, saying that should be the next move if a majority of Albertans vote yes on a referendum on equalization that'll happen sometime this spring. Barnes says Albertans need a stronger hand in negotiating a better deal.
That's right. So Barnes was on the Fair Deal panel that viewers will recall that sort of went around the province a year ago now. It's so hard to keep track of this. With the pandemic's messed with my whole sense of time. But anyways, he was on this panel and he sort of put out a number of statements over the past little while saying that, look, if we're going to negotiate a fair deal with the federal government, we can't just have a carrot. We need a carrot and a stick. And for him, an independence referendum is part of that negotiating position. So he said that this week, and then Premier Jason Kenney was asked about this at a press conference on Wednesday, and he said sort of the same thing he's always said. He said, look, the UCP is a pro-Canada party, a pro-federalism party. The UCP voters and base signed on to that. So he's not really willing to play these games. Barnes, of course, replying and saying that this is a necessary step that needs to be taken if we're going to negotiate some sort of deal with Ottawa. So, Drew Barnes, one MLA, certainly we're not seeing a large fracture within the UCP about this sort of thing, but it's still a subject of concern. It's still something people are talking about. 2 years into this UCP government's mandate.
Drew Barnes is very popular in southeastern Alberta, Medicine Hat, Cypress County. But do you think if he keeps pushing about the independence issue, that maybe eventually Jason Kenney will say, you know what, I want you to sit as an independent, get kicked out of caucus?
Well, it could end up there, but I mean, I think to some extent, Jason Kenney is dealing with a little bit of a threat from his right, whether or not you consider independence to the right of the UCP or not. His polling numbers are relatively low at this point. He's struggled with popularity during the pandemic, no doubt about that. I think he's in a position where he probably doesn't want to upset certain segments of the UCP, not necessarily even the base, but people who would vote UCP. We are seeing the growth in some of these other sort of conservative right-wing parties. And what do I think that they're going to form, the Wild Rose Independence Party is going to form government? No. But I think he probably wants to guard that right flank a little bit and make sure that he's not seeing too many voters defect in terms of fundraising, in terms of votes, in terms of whatever. So, as a tactical move, I'm not sure he'd want to do it. And I should say the other benefit to Kenny being able is that when Barnes brings this up, Kenny can then turn around and sort of tamp down on these fires a bit, and it makes it harder for his opponents to say, "Oh, you're a separatist. You're going to take Canada out or Alberta out of Canada," and things like that.
Right. The province expanded its COVID-19 supports with $625 to help people isolate, and the funding will really help First Nations people both on and off the reserve and to those living in Métis settlements. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, that's right. So that's basically the gist of it. The province has put in place these isolation supports basically for people who need to quarantine. Perhaps they need to go to a hotel because they live in a communal gathering or a multi-generational household. This money is meant to just sort of smooth that over, make it easier for people to isolate. Not just make it easier and less stressful for them, but also literally give them a way to do it so that they don't have to go to work and things like that, because not everyone could take 2 weeks off work to isolate. So that's how that works. And then the other thing that's happened quite recently on Wednesday, in fact, is the government announced a whole bunch more money, about $68.5 million, to go to continuing care and long-term care facilities, hospices, places like that, sort of recognizing the added strains on that part of the healthcare system. And this is for PPE, this is for screening, these sorts of things. So just a couple more supports that have come as we continue to slowly work our way through the pandemic.
Tyler, 8 communities in our province have expressed concerns about changes to the government rules that allow coal mining. They include us here in Lethbridge, Canmore, Longview, and Turner Valley. And the Blood Tribe has also said it'll be fighting the changes in court.
Yeah, that's right. So what this is there was a policy under, I believe, the Peter Lougheed government about coal mining on the eastern slopes of the Rockies. So about a 45-year-old policy, give or take. The UCP has sort of walked that back, and they've granted sort of exploration leases to the area. So that doesn't mean we're going to see open pit coal mines, in the eastern slopes just yet. But it does mean that companies can go in and try and find places where they might mine. So there's been a pretty significant backlash from this. Corb Lund and Paul Brandt, the country music stars from Alberta, spoke out against this. This led to the cancellation of some of these leases by the UCP, but the majority of them, certainly sort of the geographic majority of them, do still remain. So, as you say, the mayors have spoken out. Kenny was on the radio on Wednesday morning talking about this and said people sort of need to respect coal workers and understand the industry. Again, like the pandemic, not an issue that I see going away anytime soon here. He's been being asked a lot of questions about it. He's got mayors asking him about it. It's going to be, I think, a political hot potato for the next little while.
It must be tough for the Premier as well, because on one hand, you have to create jobs, to get the economy stimulated, get people working. But on the other hand, you're impacting the environment, and which may also impact, with these coal mines, impact our water supplies. So it's kind of a fine line. He's put in a kind of a tough spot here.
He is. And the other thing that I didn't mention, is these communities are all sort of downstream of where these projects might be. So that's sort of the specific concern, is what this might do to water in these communities.
Many people in the Alberta energy sector, Tyler, are still stunned that the cancellation of the Keystone XL pipeline expansion, with U.S. President Joe Biden pulling the presidential permit. Premier Kenny is hinting that there may be a legal case for the Alberta government and TC Energy to get their money back.
Yeah, he sort of hinted at this in a Facebook Live this week, saying that they're exploring their options to try and recover the money that's been put into the project, as you say, both by TC Energy and by the Alberta government. What that might look like, I don't know if anyone knows just yet. There's been some speculation about what options are available out there, and a lot of the commentary, I would say, has not been, let's say, optimistic towards the government's position. But he is still talking about it. And the other thing on that front, just more goes to show that Keystone XL will never not be part of our lives, is that the NDP is still pushing to see the details of the financial agreement, I guess, between the Alberta government and TC Energy. And this came up in committee recently, and the UCP sort of blocked the NDP motion and brought in their own motion that was a little bit less robust, let's say. The UCP motion basically excluded anything that would have been sort of confidential business type stuff. Obviously, the NDP wants to see that because that would give more information about it. So I think that's another thing that's going to be ongoing for a while here, especially in the legislature. It's good question period fodder. It's good politicking for the opposition to try and get the details of this because, at this point, we don't actually know an exact dollar figure on how much Albertans could be paying into this project.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, like, how much did we actually invest ahead of time, knowing that there's a potential of a different administration in the United States, which happened with Biden taking over and yanking the presidential permit. Was it over $1 billion, like $1.2 billion of taxpayers' dollars, Alberta taxpayers' dollars invested?
Yeah. The number that sticks in my mind is 1.5 billion put up, but then there's also several billion more in guarantees of some sort, I believe is sort of how it's been described. So that I think is where people are sort of unsure about what is going to happen because it's not like we bought it, like the federal government bought the Trans Mountain expansion, but we did sort of backstop it in some way. And so, maybe those details aren't even sorted out yet, but no doubt politicians making noise about this and they want to know.
And we can't forget about the over 1,000 Albertans who lost their jobs as well as a result of the permit being yanked here. Tyler, the police were called to the Alberta legislature on Monday thinking there may have been a bomb. What happened there?
That's right. It's not a whole lot to it. They were bomb threat. They came down and they found that it was a box of spent fireworks. I couldn't. Maybe were there fireworks at New Year's? I don't even know. I feel like this year's been so different that it's hard to imagine where those would have come from. But yeah, bomb threat that turned out to be fireworks at the Alberta legislature. So a little bit of not lighter news per se, but certainly not as dramatic as the Keystone XL pipeline cancellation, I suppose.
Tyler, Lethbridge West MLA Shannon Phillips is back in the news again, and it involves 2 police officers here in Lethbridge. Tell me more.
Yeah, so this originated from, I believe, in 2017 when Shannon Phillips was at a restaurant having a meeting, something to do with the Castle Region Park, I believe. And there were 2 Lethbridge police officers who were there who sort of kept track of who she'd met with, what they were talking about, and had posted about it on Facebook. Now, Shannon Phillips put in a complaint about this, and that was investigated by the chief and I believe dismissed. Now, the other side of this, and that's where it gets a little bit tricky and is what is happening right now, is there's also an investigation going on about accessing police records about this, some sort of search being done by the police. Now, one of the people has been demoted for doing these improper searches. And so Shannon Phillips was basically pushing to have these complaints, which were being dealt with separately. She wanted them sort of put together. So so that has happened. And she's now able to appeal the decisions that have been made in that sort of side of this instance. So it's a little bit of sort of tricky inside baseball on police enforcement and rules and things like that. But it all sort of stems from this one incident where she was sort of being watched by members of the Lethbridge Police Service.
Should be interesting to see how that plays out. Our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, thanks again for joining me from Edmonton.
Always a pleasure, Hal.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and thanks for watching.